The harsh winds that swept across the Montana Territory in September 1883 carried more than just the promise of an early winter. They carried the sounds of desperate voices that would forever change the life of rancher Sam McKenna, and test everything he believed about justice, courage, and the responsibilities of decent people when confronted with unthinkable evil. Sam McKenna operated the Circle M Ranch on 8,000 acres of prime grazing land along Bitter Creek, about 40 miles northeast of the growing town of Helena. At 38, Sam had built his spread into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Through 15 years of backbreaking work, careful management, and the kind of stubborn determination that defines successful frontier ranchers, the Circle M was more than just a business. To Sam, it was a legacy he'd hoped to pass on to the family he'd never had. His wife Caroline had died in childbirth 7 years earlier, taking their unborn son with her, and Sam had thrown himself into ranch work with the intensity of a man trying to outrun his grief. The ranch employed 12 full-time cowboys and seasonal hands, making it one of the larger operations in the area and a significant contributor to the local economy. Sam had earned a reputation throughout Lewis and Clark County as a man of integrity, who treated his workers fairly, paid his debts promptly, and minded his own business unless circumstances forced him to get involved in community affairs. He served on the Territorial Cattle Association and had been elected to the Helena Town Council twice. Though he preferred the solitude of ranch life to the complications of politics and social obligations, the discovery that would thrust Sam into an international incident began at dawn on September 15th. When he was checking the fence lines along the eastern boundary of his property, Sam had been having problems with rustlers and had decided to inspect the more remote sections of his land personally, rather than sending one of his hands to investigate reports of missing cattle. As Sam rode along Bitter Creek, following the natural boundary that separated his property from the vast wilderness that stretched toward the Canadian border, he heard sounds that made him rein in his horse and listen carefully. Over the noise of the wind in the creek, he could hear what sounded like human voices, women's voices calling out in obvious distress. "Hello," Sam called out, his voice carrying across the early morning landscape. "Is someone there?" The responding cries became more urgent and desperate, confirming Sam's suspicion that people were in trouble somewhere ahead. He spurred his horse forward, following the sounds through a grove of cottonwood trees that lined the creek bank. What Sam found in a clearing about 200 yards from the creek would haunt him for the rest of his life and thrust him into a situation that would test his courage, his principles, and his faith in humanity. This rescue story is about to reveal an international conspiracy that will shock you to your core. Hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories about ordinary heroes who changed history. Chained to trees in the small clearing were 5 women, all appearing to be in their 20s or early 30s, all showing signs of prolonged captivity and abuse. The women were secured with heavy iron shackles around their ankles, connected by chains to large metal spikes that had been driven deep into the ground. Their clothing was torn and dirty, their faces gaunt from malnutrition, and their eyes held the hollow look of people who had given up hope of rescue. Sam dismounted immediately and approached the women carefully, speaking in calm, reassuring tones while trying to process the incomprehensible scene before him. "It's all right," Sam said gently. "I'm going to help you. Can you understand me? Do you speak English?" 2 of the women responded immediately in accented English, while the others spoke in what Sam recognized as European languages he couldn't identify. One woman, who appeared to be the eldest of the group, managed to speak clearly despite her obvious weakness. "Please, sir," the woman said in English, heavily accented with what Sam would later learn was a Germanic dialect. "We have been here for many weeks. They left us here to die. Please, you must help us." Sam could see that the women's situation was desperate. Their chains were secured with heavy padlocks that would require tools to remove, and their physical condition indicated that they had been surviving on minimal food and water for an extended period. But most disturbing to Sam was the obvious evidence that these women had been victims of systematic abuse and captivity. "Who did this to you?" Sam asked as he examined the chains and locks. "Who left you here?" "Men who took us from our families," another woman replied in broken English. "They said we were to work, but they brought us to this wilderness and used us terribly." Sam realized he was looking at victims of what would later be recognized as human trafficking. Though the terminology didn't exist in 1883, these women had obviously been kidnapped from their home countries and transported to the American frontier for purposes that Sam's mind recoiled from contemplating. I'm going to get tools to cut these chains, Sam told the women. My ranch is about 5 miles from here. I'll be back as quickly as possible with help. Please don't leave us, one of the younger women pleaded. They said they would return. If they find you here, nobody's going to hurt you anymore, Sam said with grim determination. I give you my word on that. Sam rode back to his ranch at a full gallop, his mind racing as he tried to understand what he'd discovered and plan the most effective response. He knew that freeing the women was only the beginning. Whoever had chained them in that clearing was still at large and might return at any time. Back at the Circle M, Sam gathered his foreman, Jerry Walsh, and 2 of his most trusted hands, explaining the situation and requesting their help in what might become a dangerous rescue operation. Jesus Christ, Sam, Jerry said, after hearing the details. Who the hell would do something like that? I don't know, Sam replied grimly, but we're going to find out. Right now, our job is to get those women free and safe. We'll worry about justice later. Sam loaded his wagon with bolt cutters, medical supplies, food, water, and blankets, while Jerry and the other hands armed themselves for the possibility of encountering whoever had committed this atrocity. The rescue party rode out immediately, with Sam leading them back to the clearing, where the 5 women waited in desperate hope. The process of freeing the women required nearly 2 hours of careful work with bolt cutters and pry bars, as the chains and shackles had been designed to prevent escape. During this time, Sam learned more about the women's circumstances and began to understand the international scope of the crime he'd uncovered. The women identified themselves as Maria from Austria, Ingrid from Sweden, Katerina from Poland, Elena from Romania, and Sofia from Greece. They had all been recruited in their home countries with promises of legitimate work in America, only to be kidnapped upon arrival and transported to the Montana wilderness for purposes that Sam was beginning to understand were far more sinister than simple forced labor. How many men were involved in bringing you here? Sam asked, as his hands worked to free the last of the chains. 6 men, maybe 7, Maria replied. The leader was American, but he spoke many languages. He said we were valuable cargo, would make him very rich. As the last chain fell away and the women were finally free, Sam realized that he had inadvertently involved himself in something far larger and more dangerous than a simple rescue operation. But he was about to discover that the implications of his actions would extend far beyond anything he could have imagined. Sanctuary and Revelations. Sam McKenna transported the 5 rescued women back to his ranch, where he immediately set about providing them with medical care, proper food, and safe shelter while trying to understand the full scope of what he'd uncovered. The Circle M ranch house, which had seemed too large and empty since Caroline's death, suddenly became a refuge for women who had experienced horrors that challenged Sam's understanding of human cruelty. Jerry Walsh's wife, Margaret, came to the ranch immediately upon hearing about the rescue and took charge of the women's immediate medical and emotional needs. Margaret had served as an unofficial nurse during several frontier emergencies and understood both the physical and psychological care that trauma victims required. These women have been through hell, Margaret told Sam privately after her initial examination. They're malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of systematic abuse. But they're strong. They wouldn't have survived what they've been through if they weren't fighters. Over the next several hours, as the women recovered their strength and began to feel safe enough to share their stories, Sam learned details about an international criminal operation that was far more sophisticated and extensive than anything he'd encountered on the frontier. The women had all been recruited in major European cities by men claiming to represent American companies seeking domestic workers, seamstresses, and factory employees. They had been promised good wages, comfortable housing, and the opportunity to build new lives in America. But upon arriving in New York, they had been immediately kidnapped and transported westward in a network of safe houses and temporary camps until they reached the Montana wilderness. The man who organized everything called himself Colonel Morrison, Maria explained as she sipped hot soup in Sam's kitchen. He spoke perfect German, Swedish, Polish. He could talk to all of us in our own languages. He said we were going to work for very important people who would pay well for our services. What kind of services? Sam asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. At first, he said housework and cooking, Ingrid replied. But then he began talking about entertaining important visitors and being companions for wealthy men who valued European women. Sam felt his anger building as he understood the full implications of what these women had experienced. They had been victims of an international trafficking operation that targeted vulnerable women in Europe and transported them to the American frontier to serve as forced prostitutes for wealthy clients. "How long were you held in that clearing?" Sam asked. 3 weeks. Maybe 4, Alina answered. The men said they were waiting for the right buyer, someone who would pay well for all 5 of us together. They brought us food and water every few days, but mostly they just left us there. Sophia, who had been the quietest of the group, finally spoke up with information that would prove crucial to understanding the true scope of the criminal operation. "Before they chained us to the trees," Sophia said, "Colonel Morrison received a telegram that made him very excited. He said a very important client was coming from far away to inspect the merchandise personally. He said this client was willing to pay more money than anyone had ever offered before." "Did he say who this client was?" Sam asked. "Not exactly," Sophia replied. "But I heard him talking to his men about preparations for someone he called his Royal Highness. He said everything had to be perfect, because royalty expected the finest quality." Sam felt a chill as he processed this information. If Sophia was correct, these women had been kidnapped and held as merchandise for someone claiming royal status. The implications of such a transaction extended far beyond local crime into the realm of international incident. Dr. William Harrison arrived at the ranch that evening to examine the women and provide formal medical documentation of their condition. Dr. Harrison had served as the territorial physician for Lewis and Clark County and understood the legal implications of documenting evidence of serious crimes. "Mr. McKenna," Dr. Harrison said after completing his examinations, "these women have been victims of crimes that extend far beyond Montana territorial jurisdiction. The physical evidence of their treatment, combined with their testimonies, suggests an organized criminal enterprise that may have connections to international trafficking." "What do you recommend, Doc?" Sam asked. "We need to contact federal authorities immediately," Dr. Harrison replied. "This isn't something that local law enforcement can handle. We're potentially dealing with international criminals, and if the women's account is accurate, someone claiming to represent foreign nobility." That evening, as Sam made arrangements to send urgent telegrams to federal officials in Helena and Washington, D.C., he found himself reflecting on how a simple fence inspection had led him into a situation with potentially international ramifications. "Sam," Jerry Walsh said as they stood on the ranch house porch, "you realize that whoever did this to those women is going to be looking for them. And when they figure out you're the one who freed them, they're going to come looking for you too." "Let them come," Sam replied grimly. "I've got 12 good men working this ranch, and every one of them knows how to handle trouble. Besides, what was I supposed to do? Leave those women chained to trees?" "No, you did the right thing," Jerry agreed. "But doing the right thing doesn't always guarantee a peaceful outcome." Sam had positioned armed guards around the ranch and sent riders to alert neighboring ranchers about the potential for trouble. But he was confident that his men could handle any threats from the criminals responsible for the women's captivity. What Sam couldn't have anticipated was that within 24 hours, his ranch would become the center of an international diplomatic crisis that would test not only his courage, but his understanding of justice, politics, and the complex relationships between nations in the changing world of the 1880s. As the rescued women settled into the safety of the Circle M Ranch for their first peaceful night's sleep in months, none of them could have imagined that their rescue would soon attract the attention of figures whose presence would transform a simple Montana ranch into the unlikely setting for events that would be discussed in the highest levels of government on 2 continents. The royal arrival the morning of September 17th dawned clear and cold across the Montana territory, with Sam McKenna rising early to check on the 5 rescued women and coordinate with the federal marshals who were expected to arrive from Helena later that day. Sam had spent the previous evening reviewing the telegrams he'd received from territorial and federal authorities, all of whom expressed urgent interest in investigating what appeared to be an international criminal conspiracy. But at precisely 9:30 that morning, as Sam was discussing security arrangements with Jerry Walsh, one of his ranch hands came galloping toward the house with news that would change everything about the situation they thought they understood. "Boss," called Tom Bradley, Sam's youngest cowhand, as he reined in his horse near the porch, "you need to see what's coming up the main road. There's a caravan of fancy carriages headed this way. And I mean fancy like nothing I've ever seen in Montana." Sam grabbed his field glasses and climbed to the second-story porch of the ranch house, from where he could see for miles across the rolling prairie. What he observed through the lenses defied explanation. A procession of elaborate carriages, obviously expensive and foreign-made, moving toward his ranch with military precision. The lead carriage was particularly impressive, painted in deep blue and gold, with what appeared to be heraldic crests on the doors. It was followed by 4 additional carriages, all of similar quality, and a supply wagon carrying uniformed men, who were clearly security personnel. The entire procession was escorted by mounted riders in military-style uniforms that Sam didn't recognize. "Jerry, get the men armed and ready," Sam ordered. "I don't know what this is, but it's not a social call." "You think it's connected to those women?" Jerry asked. "It's too much of a coincidence for it not to be," Sam replied grimly. As the caravan approached the ranch gates, Sam could see that the lead carriage flew small flags that he didn't recognize, but which clearly indicated official status of some kind. The entire procession had the formal appearance of a diplomatic or governmental mission, which made its presence at his remote Montana ranch even more puzzling and concerning. The caravan stopped at the main gate to the ranch, and Sam watched through his field glasses as uniformed men dismounted and began what appeared to be a security assessment of the property. After several minutes, one of the uniformed figures approached the gate and called out in accented English, "I seek audience with Mr. Samuel McKenna, owner of this property. I bear credentials from His Royal Highness Prince Victor Emmanuel of Savoy Montenegro, representing urgent diplomatic business." Sam felt his blood run cold as he processed what he'd just heard. The women's account of being held for a royal buyer had been accurate, and now that buyer had apparently arrived to complete the transaction unaware that his merchandise had already been freed. This confrontation is about to explode into the most incredible international incident you've ever heard. Hit that subscribe button, because you won't believe how this ordinary rancher stood up to European royalty. Sam descended from the house and walked toward the gate, accompanied by Jerry and 4 armed ranch hands. As he approached the ornate carriages, he could see that the man who had spoken was wearing the uniform of what appeared to be a European military or diplomatic service. "I'm Samuel McKenna," Sam announced. "What business do you have on my ranch?" The uniformed man, who appeared to be in his 40s with the bearing of a career military officer, stepped forward and presented an elaborate document sealed with red wax. "I am Colonel Heinrich von Richter, representing His Royal Highness Prince Victor Emmanuel. The prince has traveled from Europe to complete a transaction involving certain assets that were being held in this vicinity." Sam studied the document, though its formal language and foreign seals meant little to him. But the implications of the prince's presence were becoming increasingly clear. "Colonel, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," Sam said carefully. "I don't know anything about any transaction involving the prince." "Mr. McKenna," Colonel von Richter replied, "we have reliable information that you recently discovered and removed certain European women who were being held nearby. The prince has traveled a great distance and invested considerable resources in acquiring these women, and he expects to complete the arrangement as planned." Sam felt his anger rising as he understood that he was being asked to turn over 5 human beings as if they were cattle being sold at market. But he also realized that he was confronting someone who claimed to represent foreign royalty, which created complications that extended far beyond a simple criminal matter. "Colonel," Sam said firmly, "I don't care who your prince is or where he's from. Those women are human beings, not merchandise. They're not for sale, and they're under my protection." "Mr. McKenna," Colonel von Richter replied, his tone becoming more formal and threatening, "I think you misunderstand the situation. His Royal Highness has legal documentation supporting his claim to these women, and he has the authority of his government behind his actions." At this point, the door of the lead carriage opened, and a man stepped out who was obviously the prince himself. He appeared to be in his late 30s, dressed in an elaborate military-style uniform, covered with decorations and insignia. His bearing and manner indicated someone accustomed to absolute authority and unquestioning obedience. Prince Victor Emmanuel approached the gate with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. When he spoke, his English was perfect, but heavily accented with what Sam later learned was an Italian dialect. "Mr. McKenna," the prince said, "I am Prince Victor Emmanuel of Savoy Montenegro. I have come to America on private business, and I require the return of property that belongs to me. I understand that you have interfered with my affairs, but I am prepared to compensate you for any inconvenience you may have experienced." "Your Highness," Sam replied, deliberately keeping his voice calm and respectful while standing his ground, "those women don't belong to anyone. They're free human beings who were kidnapped and held against their will. I've turned them over to federal authorities for their protection." Sam was lying about having turned the women over to authorities. They were still at his ranch, but he wanted to gauge the prince's reaction, and by time, while he figured out how to handle this unprecedented situation, the prince's expression darkened as he processed Sam's response. "Mr. McKenna, you have involved yourself in matters that are beyond your comprehension. I have invested significant resources in acquiring those women through legitimate channels, and I expect delivery as promised." "Legitimate channels?" Sam replied, his anger finally overriding his diplomatic caution. "You call kidnapping and human trafficking legitimate? I call it business," the prince replied coldly, "and I suggest you reconsider your position before you create an international incident that will have consequences extending far beyond this primitive ranch." Sam realized that he was facing a moment that would define not only his own character, but potentially the principles that America claimed to represent. He was being asked to choose between avoiding international complications and protecting 5 innocent women from a fate that violated everything he believed about human dignity and freedom. "Your Highness," Sam said, making his decision, "I don't care about international incidents. Those women are staying free, and you can take your business elsewhere." The confrontation that followed would become the subject of diplomatic correspondence between Washington and European capitals, and would establish Sam McKenna as an unlikely hero in the growing movement to combat international human trafficking. Justice and consequences. The standoff between Sam McKenna and Prince Victor Emmanuel might have escalated into violence if not for the timely arrival of federal marshals who had been riding hard from Helena after receiving Sam's urgent telegrams about the rescued women. Marshal Robert Clayton and his deputy arrived at the Circle M ranch, just as the tension between the American rancher and the European prince was reaching a breaking point. Marshal Clayton immediately assessed the situation and took charge in a manner that demonstrated both diplomatic awareness and firm commitment to American law. The marshal had dealt with international complications before during his 20 years in federal service, and he understood the delicate balance required when foreign nationals claimed privileges that conflicted with American legal principles. "Your Highness," Marshal Clayton said, approaching the prince with formal courtesy while keeping his hand near his sidearm. "I'm Federal Marshal Robert Clayton. I understand you're here on business, but I need to inform you that you're currently on American soil, where American laws apply to everyone, regardless of title or nationality." Prince Victor Emmanuel's reaction revealed both his sense of entitlement and his surprise at being challenged by what he clearly viewed as colonial law enforcement. "Marshal," the prince replied, "I am operating under diplomatic immunity and international commercial law. The women in question were legally acquired through established channels, and I have documentation supporting my ownership rights." "Your Highness," Marshal Clayton responded, "there's no such thing as ownership rights over human beings in the United States. Slavery was abolished 20 years ago, and human trafficking is a federal crime, regardless of who's involved." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of additional federal personnel, including U.S. Attorney General's Representative James Morrison, who had been dispatched from Washington specifically to handle the international implications of the case. Morrison's presence indicated that news of the situation had reached the highest levels of the federal government. "Gentlemen," Morrison announced, "I've been authorized by the Attorney General to handle this matter on behalf of the United States government. Your Highness, I need to inform you that you're suspected of involvement in international human trafficking, which is a serious federal crime." Prince Victor Emmanuel's response revealed the arrogance and sense of immunity that had enabled his criminal enterprise to operate across international boundaries. "You forget yourself, sir," the prince declared. "I am a member of European royalty, operating under the protection of my government. You have no authority to interfere with my commercial activities." "Actually, Your Highness," Morrison replied, "I have a federal warrant for your arrest, along with warrants for anyone assisting you in criminal activities on American soil." The prince's confident demeanor began to crack as he realized that his royal status might not protect him from American justice. But his response revealed the international scope of the criminal operation that Sam had inadvertently uncovered. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," the prince said angrily. "This operation extends across multiple countries and involves clients at the highest levels of European society. If you proceed with this arrest, you will create diplomatic complications that your government is not prepared to handle." "Let me worry about the diplomatic complications," Morrison replied. "Right now, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking." As federal agents moved to arrest the prince and his entourage, Sam finally learned the full scope of what he had disrupted by freeing the 5 women. During questioning that followed, investigators discovered that Prince Victor Emmanuel had been operating an international trafficking network that transported women from Europe to wealthy clients throughout the American frontier. The operation had been facilitated by the prince's royal status, which allowed him to travel freely across international boundaries and provided cover for what appeared to be legitimate diplomatic or commercial activities. The 5 women Sam had rescued represented just one small portion of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for several years. Mr. McKenna, Attorney General Morrison told Sam during debriefing sessions, "Your actions have uncovered one of the most sophisticated international criminal operations we've ever encountered. The prince's arrest has provided us with evidence that will help us shut down trafficking networks in multiple countries." The 5 rescued women were placed under federal protection, while investigators gathered evidence and prepared for what would become a landmark prosecution. Their testimonies revealed details about the recruitment methods, transportation networks, and client lists that helped authorities understand the full scope of the international trafficking operation. Maria, who had become the informal spokesperson for the group, expressed their gratitude to Sam in terms that reflected both their relief at being free and their amazement at finding someone willing to risk everything to help strangers. Mr. McKenna, Maria said during one of their final conversations, "At the ranch, in our countries, powerful people do whatever they want to, people like us. We never imagined that in America, a rancher would risk his life to protect women he didn't even know." "In America," Sam replied, "we believe that all people deserve to be free, regardless of where they come from or who's trying to hurt them." The trial of Prince Victor Emmanuel became an international sensation, with newspapers throughout America and Europe following every detail of the proceedings. The prince's conviction on multiple charges of human trafficking sent a message that American courts would not tolerate such crimes regardless of the perpetrator's social status or nationality. But for Sam McKenna, the most meaningful outcome was the knowledge that 5 women who had faced unimaginable horrors were now free to build new lives in America. The federal government provided the women with protected status and assistance in establishing themselves in safe communities where they could recover from their trauma and pursue their dreams. 2 years after the rescue, Sam received a letter from Maria, who had married a German immigrant farmer in Wisconsin and was expecting her first child. The letter, written in careful English, expressed gratitude that extended beyond words. "Dear Mr. McKenna," the letter read, "you gave us something we thought we had lost forever: hope for the future. My husband and I have named our son Samuel, so that we will always remember the man who showed us that there are still heroes in the world." Sam kept that letter for the rest of his life, along with similar correspondence from the other 4 women, who had all found safety, love, and new purpose in America. Their success in rebuilding their lives became his greatest source of pride, more meaningful than any recognition he received for his role in exposing the international trafficking network. The Circle M Ranch continued to operate successfully, but Sam's reputation had evolved from that of a competent cattle rancher to something approaching legend. His willingness to confront a European prince to protect 5 kidnapped women became a story that was told throughout the American West as an example of the values that defined the frontier spirit. If this incredible story about standing up to power and protecting the innocent moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories about ordinary heroes who changed the world. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person can make a difference when they choose to do what's right. Comment below and tell us, would you have had the courage to stand up to royalty to protect strangers? Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspiring stories. Remember, true nobility comes from how we treat the most vulnerable, not from titles or wealth. This remarkable story reminds us that heroism often comes from ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when confronted with injustice. Sam McKenna's decision to free 5 chained women led to the exposure of an international criminal network and demonstrated that American principles of freedom and human dignity applied to everyone, regardless of their origin or the power of those who sought to exploit them. The confrontation between a Montana rancher and European royalty became a symbol of the values that defined America in the 1880s. The belief that all people deserved freedom and that no one was above the law. Sam's courage in standing up to Prince Victor Emmanuel sent a message that would resonate across international boundaries and help establish precedents for combating human trafficking that continue to influence law enforcement today. The story of the Circle M Ranch rescue proves that sometimes the most important battles for justice are fought not by governments or armies, but by individuals who refuse to look the other way when they encounter evil and who are willing to risk everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves.